our CDO Summit Series kickoff. I'm Caitlin Halferty, Director of our IBM AI Accelerator. I have the unique privilege of delivering AI initiatives internally at scale and then integrating these capabilities into products that will hopefully be of value to you in your own data and AI work. Thank you so much for joining us today. Last year, we concluded our long-running CDO Summit with our 10th event. We started these events in 2014 with about 20 attendees. We have all witnessed the exponential growth of the Chief Data Officer role over the last several years, and yet we still have work to do. Our vision for 2020 was to reimagine our peer-to-peer forums. This work was well underway when COVID-19 hit all of us. We quickly pivoted to take our summits online and create immersive and interactive sessions that we hope will be well worth your time. We will be convening once per month through November on a range of topics, including AI ethics and trust, governance and privacy, automated workflows, and much more. Also, we're expanding our scope to include Chief Technology Officers. We know how important the CDO and CTO partnership is for leading organizations, and we want to create space to strengthen our knowledge and impact in this area. As we proceed through our series, we'll be sharing more and encouraging you to invite your CTOs into our sessions. What has always set our events apart has been you. It's your experience, open-mindedness, willing to share your obstacles and successes that have made these so incredibly powerful. Today is our Summit Series kickoff session, and we couldn't think of a better topic than CDOs leading in turbulent times. Chief Data Officers are uniquely positioned to lead in uncertainty. CDOs know the data, how it can and should be used, both legally and ethically, are incredibly creative and by definition are change agents. We are honored to have the past 3 CDO Club CDOs of the Year joining us today. Anthony Scriffignano from Dun & Bradstreet, Linda Avery from Verizon, and my boss, Inderpal Bhandari from IBM. So please share your questions as we go. We are very much looking forward to a highly interactive session and Q&A. Thank you for making the investment of your time to join us and share your questions and insights. My hope for this Summit Series is that we all emerge stronger, better informed, and energized as data leaders. With that, let me turn it over to CDO Club CEO Dave Mathison to kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Hi, I'm Dave Mathison. I'm the founder and CEO of the CDO Club and the CDO Summit, and we are absolutely thrilled to be continuing our partnership with IBM and appreciate the opportunity to celebrate the accomplishments of our community and recognize the achievements of our colleagues, especially during these challenging times. COVID-19 clearly has accelerated the demand for high-quality data and analytics across almost every sector and region of the world. Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, recently said that we have seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in just the last 2 months. Since January 2020, CDOs and CTOs have been asked to perform Herculean tasks, projects that might have been nice to haves on the data roadmap just a few months ago have now been fully implemented. Things like work from home and telecommuting and conferences like this one via Zoom and via WebEx. Chief data, analytics, and technology officers are under tremendous pressure to navigate these new challenges using data and analytics. For this inaugural CDO Summit, we'll take a wide look at the implications of the pandemic across 3 key sectors: telecommunications, financial services, and technology. All of the speakers are going to be available for your questions via chat, and we're also going to take live Q&A at the end. Now, as Caitlin mentioned, for the first time ever on the same stage, we have 3 CDO Clubs CDO of the Year award winners: Inderpal Bhandari from IBM, Anthony Scriffignano from Dun & Bradstreet, and our first guest, Linda Avery, the Chief Data Officer at Verizon Communications. So the first question for Linda. Linda, how have you seen the role of the CDO and CTO change since the COVID pandemic started in January?
I think from the perspective of a telecommunications company, up to this point, Mother's Day, was the day where we saw the highest traffic. At the turn of a dime, Mother's Day became every day in terms of the network usage. We saw a tremendous change in the profile of how our network was being used. Lots of gaming, video conferencing like we have today. Commuting disappeared. So the network usage profile just changed enormously. And I mean, the role of the CDO became more central than ever. I mean, frankly, it's been landing on the moon. You know, it's in the dark, it's the data that guides you.
Has there been a big transition for you of moving from financial services to telecommunications?
There are lots of familiar themes. And, you know, interestingly enough, if I think about the journey that financial services has been undertaking since the financial crisis, in terms of needing to get, you know, the data house in order, that's a journey that other industries are perhaps not as advanced in. And so I think there's a lot that can be applied from the financial services industry vis-a-vis data and the disciplines that you need to have. So certainly around data governance and architecture.
I was just listening to what Linda was saying and thinking, you know, how could it be more of a challenge? Oh yeah, if you worked for a telecom company and suddenly the entire world is using telecom, right? We're kind of in a similar situation. There's two facets to this crisis. One is the epidemiological impact. There's many facets, but two big ones. The epidemiological impact and also the business impact. What happens when all businesses are forced to either close their doors or change their supply chains or rethink how they rethink everything, right? All that we do looking at businesses and looking at how they interact with each other is about that. So the data that we have is about that. And it changes at a rate that was just fine before everything got disrupted. And now all of a sudden everything got disrupted and everybody comes and says, well, what does the data say? And on an almost daily basis, I say, you know, 2 points will always determine a line, but not a trend, right? You have to have enough data to be able to really understand what's going on. And sorry, in a historically unprecedented time, it is extremely unwise to use only the data of the past to look at the future. That is not a wise thing to do. So the role has changed from collector and curator and synthesizer of data to spirit guide about, please don't do that. You know, let's be careful. Let's make sure we understand the question that you're trying to ask. Let's change it into a question we can legitimately answer. There's a lot of challenge to confirmation bias. We all work in enterprises where we have so much data that if you go into it, you'll find support for anything you believe is true, right? That doesn't make it true. So we have to become much more the moderators of thinking carefully about what are we assuming about all this data that we have. And by the way, what's the rate of change of the data relative to the rate of change of disruption? Well, right now, disruption is changing a lot faster than most of the data. So be really careful about those assumptions that you make. Most of the conversations that I'm in are not about, do we have the data? Yeah, there's always those conversations. They never end and they never will end. But more of the conversations now are, what are you really trying to ask? And do we have a reason to believe that the data we want to look at to answer that question actually speaks to that question? Big, big challenge.
As global CDO of IBM, you have a broad look at other CDOs and other industries. And just wondering if you've seen the role of the CDO transform since the course of this pandemic has played out.
Well, I second, everything that my colleagues have said. It's and the one point I'd make is this has been a pretty complex situation because we had the pandemic, and then that went from pandemic to civil unrest, and it's the point that Anthony made that this is a changing situation. It's rapidly changing, and so by implication, some of the traditional stuff that you do with machine learning and data science, it all gets thrown out of the window because your data has changed so rapidly, your assumptions are all different. It's much more of a real-time kind of reporting aspect that becomes critical. So the one, it's to that point, the comment I'd make is we had, eventually when I sat back and thought about it, from a pandemic standpoint, was, well, what's the business really concerned about now? It's primarily business continuity, right? I mean, how do we keep everything going? And so our focus became to rapidly get the data around the incidence of COVID-19 and any other reporting that was going on in social media and translate that to the different sites of interest for our different areas of the business. So for supply chain, right, it was all our suppliers. For our finance people, it's all our customers. It's things like that. And getting them the latest information to the best that we could as rapidly as we could do it. And whatever techniques that do apply in real time, in those types of situations, those were the only ones that we really focused on using to give them insights and interpretation as to what's going on, while all the deeper stuff that relies on a lot of history and so forth. This, just as Anthony and Linda said, it's just changing so rapidly. You couldn't really. That would have been the wrong focus.
When we look back on all this 6 months or a year from now, what do you think would be the one or two biggest lessons you've learned as a business leader?
What has been reinforced is how agile a business can be in terms of adapting to circumstances. I think that if I were to look at what happened during the middle of March, Verizon took a workforce of 140,000 people and moved over 120,000 people over to working from home. Unbelievable. And it's not as though we were prepared to do that. I look at the agility that we've had to apply for our field technicians who, clearly are, we needed to provide support and connectivity for our customers. And we figured out ways of allowing our field technicians to install, let's say, FiOS without ever going into the home.
Wow.
Again, in a matter of weeks, we were able to put together kits. And so what was really reinforced was the ability to adapt. And coming out of that is, of course, the questioning that I think every organization is going through right now, which is, do the norms really apply going forward? And so coming out of that is really, the willingness to question more deeply how we operate as an organization, how we interact with our customers. And so I think we're just at the beginning. I'm going to add just one other dimension to this, which is, I think the other thing that I really came to learn was how much I enjoy getting to know my colleagues more multidimensionally. I think that, being invited into people's homes, having the chance to meet their children on the video conferences, barking dogs. You just met my gardener a few moments ago. It's been, I think, a way of becoming more close, a much richer community.
There's a couple of things I'd like to add to what was just said. I think that, there's this, I know Inderpal, you have a background in martial arts, and I do as well. One of the things that you learn in martial arts, advanced martial arts, is how to fight in the dark. And the first time you do this, your first reaction when they turn the lights off is, this is ridiculous. This isn't fair. I can't see the other guy. And after you kind of learn a few things, like if somebody hits you, you know where they are, you realize that nothing's fair. There's no such, this concept of fair is just for children. Getting what you want all the time is for babies. We're in a situation right now where we're disrupted, and that's not fair. Our customers are also disrupted, and that's not fair, whatever fair means, right? We have a natural tendency when there's a crisis, when there's something attacking us, it's a good metaphor to try to close in and focus on, how do I survive? How do I get through this? And the exact opposite is what we need to be doing right now. We need to be even more collaborative with our customers. We need to be even more thoughtful about how we use the precious 1 or 2 hours in the day, because you're not going to get those back. And this is a very kinetic situation. Inderpal talked about, all of those methods, machine learning and AI, there's no learning, it's math, right? And it's based on the past, and it's based on some presumptions about how much you can project what you've learned in the past to what you see in the future. If you know what you see in the future is going to be very much unlike the past, we're going to need a different boat. We're going to need different methods. We're going to need different ways of, and all of those are going to involve collaboration, transparency, authenticity. That's what's going to get us through this.
How have you adapted or changed your leadership style because of the pandemic?
Yeah, no, it's been a rapidly evolving situation, right? I would say our first focus I talked about was business continuity. I think by now we understand that business continuity, that we know how to do that. That's something that'll continue. But because the situation has changed, right? The civil unrest projecting even further, huge unemployment rate. I mean, whether you believe the official numbers of 13 or 16, or what some people tell me is like more like 25 really, it just suggests that things are going to be so very different. And just the nature of the work that we do is going to be different. Are we even focused on the right things, from a societal standpoint? It raises all those questions. And I think the important point, which was alluded to by both Linda and Anthony, is everybody is going through that. Our customers are going through that thinking. Our employees are going through that thinking. So everybody's is in that situation. The transition from the business continuity to the much more what I'm going to call the question centric, where you're actually just questioning everything, that became very evident to me when we went from the pandemic to the civil unrest. Because all of us, for the pandemic, it was a very technical kind of approach. We had a central data and AI platform. We had the data ops were ready. It was a matter of writing that very quickly with some additional data and tuning it, to the different departments by focusing on their sites of interest, making it available to our clients and customers, etc. The moment we got to the civil, unrest, it became a much more people-centric approach. And, for instance, I spent a lot of time just talking with our employees, individually with our African-American employees, because there was really no other way to understand what they were really going through than to get in on that discussion. And so I think the people aspect of our craft is going to be heavily exercised as we go through the situation as this unfolds.
As we react to these things that are happening, our actions cause perturbations in the environment as well. So there's a lot of talk about the curve when we talk about the pandemic. And if we do this, we'll change the shape of the curve. Well, then we change our behavior as a result of another type of disruption. And it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 4 steps forward, 1 step back. We can't assume that things will naturally trend back toward where we want them to be. We have to play the deck the way it is. We have to play the cards in front of us. We have to deal with the situation that we have, not the one that we wish was there. When you talk about working from home, we all have our own views about whether we want more of that in the future or less of that in the future. I had a little conversation about that before this event this morning. There's what I want and there's what's going to happen. And we need to be very aware that our actions will change the environment. And we need to measure the impact of those actions as well, not just keep assuming we're on the path that we assume that we're on.
Inderpal, I think you make some excellent points as you open up the discussion to what has been happening, emanating out of some real unfortunate event in Minneapolis, and Anthony, in terms of the reverberations that have come out of this, and really kind of the lack of control that we have today in terms of what the future is going to hold. I think that there's been a particular smugness that we somehow have more mastery of what that future holds than we actually do. And I think that for all of us in the leadership position, the series of events has been actually very humbling. And I hope that, we take that humility to heart. And, I'm hoping that we can apply it both in terms of our greater understanding of the racial disparities that have been illuminated over the last 2 weeks. In addition, I hope that the illumination continues on in terms of our understanding as to how vulnerable we all are and how we must really take greater care of one another. there's this enormous opportunity to harvest data for social good in ways that perhaps we're not getting the attention or the airplay that they deserve.
I wish I could recap those last three comments by the three of you to use so that I can dispel the myths that chief data officers are heartless and they're robotic. Because what I hear over and over from all three of you is the humanity in all this and the humility and also leadership. Linda, how have you changed your style since November of 2019?
Well, I think that if I were to look at the change in style, for me, you have to realize if you look back in November, I had really just landed at Verizon. And, you as being somebody new to an organization, I think you kind of put out a more stoic face as you're trying to establish yourself, as though, again, you have more in the way of what to do, what the controls are. I think that if I were to look at what evolved was really a drive to really establish more collaboration across Verizon, because I needed to have that collaboration, not knowing the way forward. And I think one of the most important things that we did is we stood up a COVID analytics war room to really gain horizontal leverage across the organization in terms of what was everybody doing, to gain that transparency, to establish the authoritative sources of data for everybody. And so I think I went from a mode of operation where I was coming in and wanting to tell people what to do. And I really had to rely on the power of others in order to enable just about anything, being as new as I was. So I think that, coming out of that have been some great relationships. And I think that everybody was frankly astonished in terms of what we could all do collaboratively as a collective whole. So I think we broke down a lot of silos.
Yeah, I mean, those are excellent points. And I would add, we all think of ourselves as having a leadership style, but the reality is as you mature, you realize that you have more than one leadership style. Your style of leadership in time of crisis is very different than in time of calm. Your style of leadership when you're being attacked is very different than your style when you're maybe on the offensive. And I don't mean that in a physical sense, but in a business sense, right? We don't have one leadership style. We have like a salad bar, and we make our salad every day from the salad bar, right? And so the things that we need to put on the plate for the salad bar right now, a lot of it has to do with collaboration. It has to do with authenticity, admitting when you don't know something, asking for help. These are not signs of weakness. These are signs of strength in times of crisis. At the same time, in times of crisis, people look to leaders to be strong, to have a plan, to have a vision. So over-communicating, saying what you believe, making sure that people realize you do believe something, that you do have a vision, all of that helps. We have to, we used to when we could go to the office, right, people would watch us and take cues from whether we looked like we were having a bad day or whether we looked like we were full of energy. Well, that's not happening right now. So we have to find ways to provide that paralanguage. Video conferencing is one example, but the words we use, the tone of our communication, the types of humor, the way that we respond to the types of crises that are going on, the fact that we recognize them, all of these are important elements of authenticity, elements of humility, but also vision and a sense of moving forward. You can have both of those at the same time, like you can put more than one thing in your salad. It's okay. You don't have to be one kind of leader. You can be a very multifaceted leader, and that's what we need to be right now.
I'm still thinking about that salad. I mean, it's one, like Anthony said, it's your style is going to be different at a time like this. I think it's the one, I'm trying to build on that analogy, the salad analogy. I think it's like you're also learning from the situation, right? So in a sense, it's not this salad bar that you're that familiar with. Also, there's some new stuff coming in that you've never seen before, and you're responding to that. So that's the piece that what I've been learning about myself as we've been going through this is the emphasis on, initially it was all about, for at least for our area at IBM, because we had streamlined the whole data ops capability, the data operations capability. It was very quick to transition. And like Linda pointed out, the silos were evaporating anywhere people wanted to collaborate. So they were all looking to us to serve as the central point of distribution. All that happened very rapidly. In fact, there was really very little noise around that. But as this crisis evolved, it became clear that from a people standpoint, just a much better focus, much more listening, much more collaborative approach.
Yeah.
Nobody really has the answers. I mean, one of the things that I ended up in my conversations with our one-on-one conversations with our employees was that, look, don't hesitate to reach back out to me, even if you just want to talk and brainstorm. And just like, we were doing in the one-on-one. And if there is something that I can't do, which, might well be, but if my boss can do it, I'm happy to take that up. And I'm sure they'll respond the same way. And if not, our CEO, will do it. So, but having that reach out, it's, we've done a lot more of that since this happened than we would have otherwise. And the point that I'd make in response to your question, Dave, if we had known about this 6 months ago or 12 months ago, as you pointed out, I think this is something that we should be doing anyway.
Right.
It's to Linda's point, right? It comes down to, we have to take care of each other. That aspect is, I think, the biggest lesson learned through this.
Yeah, I'm kind of a serial collaborator, as I think you know. So I do a lot of outreach outside the organization, in academia, in business, to try to make sure you're never as smart as you think you are, right? So you have to say what you think out loud with other people, and risk being challenged on what you think, and learn from what other people think. So I try to do that as a disciplined force of will, not something that happens accidentally. Internally within the organization, it's easy to fall into a trap of, I have my stuff I need to get done, and I'm going to reach out to the people that I think I need to reach out to get my stuff done, right? Well, they have their stuff they need to get done too. And we have to do a much better job of not taking our alliances for granted, nurturing them, building them, treasuring them. It's so easy to fall into the trap. We all do this. Some people are better at not doing it than others, but we all do it. You realize that there's somebody you used to work with all the time. You haven't spoken with them in 6 months or a year. And they're right next door, maybe physically or metaphorically, to whatever it is you're doing. So consciously thinking about not only your threat radar of what are the things that are in your way, but also your opportunity space of not only how can they help you, but how can you help them? If we don't consciously focus on this, the only way, David Bray, who I think we all know, I'm going to quote him, he says that the only way through this is the only way out of this is through this, right? We've got to work with each other to get through something like this. If we become mutually repellent particles held together by a common force, every time we get near each other, we repel. Not going to work. I promise you it will get worse if we behave like that.
Now have the permission to think more disruptively than we've really been able to for a long time. And by disruptive, I mean, certainly it's along the lines, Anthony, of what you're saying. You can't really do that alone in many ways. You need to have the connectivity with other ideas that sit with, outside of your immediate sphere. And you need to leave the safety zone. Companies are going to have to reinvent how they do business. It's just not optional. And I think we've all discovered how rapidly things can be digitized that we didn't think, could. You think about, what's happened with the restaurant industry, how many restaurants are now, within the course of a week, we're able to accept online orders. How do you bring the best ideas together to end up, in the best place possible coming out of this.
You know what? One of the things that we've seen with the shuttering, quote unquote, shuttering of businesses is just because you closed your front door doesn't mean you closed your business. How many businesses have reinvented themselves? Blanket companies making face masks, companies that make scuba gear, making respirators. It's amazing that the amount of resiliency that we have as a human race when we get out of our own way.
You brought up a couple. I'd love to go deeper there. You know, what CDO colleagues or what data-driven companies have inspired you in their response to the pandemic? And
I'm going to highlight Zoom. I mean, they saw they had a market opportunity, and boy, did they seize the moment.
How could they possibly have been ready for that? How could they possibly have been ready for the increase in demand that they met?
Unbelievable. And then you think about that, then they were having issues with security. You know, we talked a little bit about the Zoom bombing earlier, but I mean, they responded to that within days.
Well, you know, big shout out to telecom, all things telecom immediately, right? Somehow they were able to move that big black switch while they were being disrupted. And I don't know, I went home one day, closed the door in my office, came into my house, and everything works. You know, times 300 million, like blow me away, right? The air travel or the airline industry, you know, 90% decrease in demand. And oh, by the way, I don't even know the number. Orders of magnitude increase in need to get stuff from point A to point B amid supply chain disruption. So, you know, private planes being, or commercial, you know, passenger planes being used for cargo, trying to figure out how to rejigger their schedules with their pilots and their type ratings, and being able to move things in and doctors and people and all of that, and never complain about it. And then the other one that everyone loves to complain about is government. You know, with all the complaints, some very noble things going on right now in government to keep us safe, despite our best efforts to get in the way. Some incredible stuff going on in that space.
Anthony, I have to interject, coming from the Federal Reserve, and shame on me for not highlighting this, but the agility and the audacity that the Federal Reserve has demonstrated in responding to this economic crisis has been phenomenal.
Amen.
I have to say that I am so proud of the people that I worked with over the previous 5 years. They have been unbelievably adaptive and have demonstrated incredible leadership here.
So think about protecting the financial economy. Think about protecting the actual well-being of people from those who would cause us harm. Think about the fact that wherever there's more money, there's more fraud, right? So there's lots of need to respond to that. Think about any dimension of what government does for you, leaving aside all the things that we would like to be better. All of us get it. The average person that you talk to that works in the public sector is not someone that has some strong political axe to grind. They're trying to get a job done. And all of those jobs were disrupted as well. And it's incredible how much didn't break.
I think, you know, all the examples that were raised by Linda and Anthony, certainly, you know, they resonate really well. The one point I would make is there have been several consortia that ended up getting formed, and often with competitive companies in the mix. You know, we're in a consortium with Microsoft and Google and Amazon and so forth. And they're all pooling data and sharing data, and they're working towards finding solutions. So that level of collaboration, I think, is also noteworthy. It's not something that would have happened, you know, ordinarily, but I think it highlights that for certain, you know, societal considerations where there is the greater good involved, you know, these companies have to come together and demonstrate that kind of leadership. So I would like to call that out in the hope of encouraging more of that behavior and that it keeps going on, especially in the field of healthcare, because I think that's the one place where, you know, we really need to move forward with data.
Happen across the board from first responders to, you know, hospitals and surgery and everything in between. All of that didn't break either. It transformed itself while it was being overwhelmed. How does that
It
happen?
was powered by bravery and selflessness in many ways.
Yeah.
And that is what is so striking. And so much of that surfaced in ways that I'm not sure any of us would have imagined possible back in November of 2019.
Probably would have said couldn't possibly happen. If we are honest with ourselves, we would say that if you asked me 5 months ago if all of this could happen without breaking, no, it's going to fall apart like a bad suit, right? And it didn't. So maybe there's some hope in there that we're not as bad as we fear we might be behind the scenes, but things aren't as fragile as we think they are, that we have more resiliency than we think we do.
If there are one or two examples or something you could point to even outside of your company where the COVID-19 pandemic has created a challenge for you and how you overcame it. Maybe start with Anthony.
Yeah, so the biggest challenge in my world was the velocity of change of data. So you had a situation that was extremely kinetic, and we had a lot of our data is business cycles, right? So people bill people and then pay or don't pay those bills. Businesses start and then they grow. There are lawsuits and liens and judgments. All of these things have a pace, which is monthly, some of it is weekly, some of it is daily. We look at millions and millions of signals a day, but that the actual movement of the thing we're looking at doesn't move that fast. And then all of a sudden it started moving that fast. So finding data sets to triangulate on the change when the rate of change of the environment changed as an order of magnitude overnight was first of all, realizing that needs to happen, that you can't use the same wrench that you used yesterday, and then realizing that you need a different kind of data. You could use the data you have, but it's like a camera with a shutter that's not opening fast enough to see what's going on, right? And now we need a video. So where do you find that data? How do you get permission to use it? How do you know it's correct? How do you know it hasn't been manipulated? How do you integrate it analytically? What kind of challenges does it create in AI? And all of those questions overnight.
I'm gonna basically align with what Anthony said here, and the challenge that we had, that the past no longer could be used to predict the future.
Yes, I also wanted to shout out to DJ Patel. Dave, that was, in fact, since you went by the sequence of CDO award winners, he was the very first one.
Right.
And so, he really, in some sense, should be part of this discussion. But he did write a blog recently outlining some of the things that needed to be done. And it pointed out, highlighted the need for transparency, which actually, if you think about it, that also transfers over to the civil unrest piece of it. It's all about eventually transparency and data ownership and being able to share data and collaborate on data very, very quickly. And I think that's where you'll see the world moving. I think those lessons will stay with us. And I think from a business standpoint, you will also see those evolve. We've always struggled with things about data ownership, data movement, ingestion, being able to do all that very quickly, setting up our pipelines and so forth. But I think the notion of transparency with some level of fairness when it comes to the actual ownership of data, I think those are some of the lessons that will stay with us, and they will get incorporated in what we do as we move forward.
You're right. In 2016, the CDO Club the first ever CDO of the year for data was DJ, and then you were next in 2017. And the importance, one of the things I read from that was the importance of collaboration. There's no way you can do this kind of stuff alone on a global scale. It just doesn't scale. And the fact that he has, folks that'll work for him for free and just, help. And that's why I think the importance of the CDO Club and the CDO community. What should we be doing? How can we help more? How can we fill that job at the Fed? How can our community help fill that chief data officer job at the Centers for Disease Control that Caitlin over at IBM pointed out? All these things are so important. That's why I'm just so glad we have you all and you joined us today to share your thoughts. I think that's a great segue into a little background on the club, and then we're going to jump into Q&A with our speakers live. So We started the CDO Club in 2011. It was really a forum so that we could help each other and collaborate with each other and your peers and encourage open and transparent interaction. And then a couple of years later, in 2013, we began the CDO of the Year Awards to really celebrate the accomplishments of our community and recognize the achievements of our colleagues. And we've got 3 of those on call. So in that collegial spirit, I'm delighted that our guests took some time out today, out of their busy schedules, even more busy than ever before, to answer your questions live. And I did want to give a shout out to the people in the Q&A. Lori, I see Mayank Prakash, I think he's over in London. We've got people who've joined us from South Africa and Australia, Joseph Gorey, we see you. So I've kind of bundled a couple of the questions together so we can answer some of the similar ones. Let's get right to it. Let's start, Linda, I think you might be on mute, but our first question from our audience is for Linda Avery. And it's all about, I think the question was, how do you embed a moral compass into your AI efforts?
Well, that is a huge question, David. I think we're talking about AI and data ethics here. So, I mean, stepping back, if you think about the state of play, even today, insights and decisions derived from data are permeating our lives. They decide which ads and offers were shown, which points to ethical concerns around bias, and frankly, whether we turn right or left in our cars. So first of all, we need to be aware that AI is a phenomenon with consequences that go way beyond technology. And while medical and scientific ethics can inform how we think, I mean, there are concepts that came through that line of thinking, like informed consent, which are frankly challenging to enforce when you think about how data gets co-located, transformed, aggregated, and when future uses are so unknowable. So when it comes to moral compass, there needs to be an ongoing, fulsome discussion with the business leadership on values, and ultimately in the creation of principles by which use cases, approaches, implementations can be measured. And so there's a real need for business education, the education of our leadership teams. And just to complicate matters even more, perceptions on what is acceptable change on an ongoing basis. And perceptions are regional. So, I mean, we've seen that happen most recently in how law enforcement has been backing off of the use of facial recognition, which had been acceptable for a number of years due to its inaccuracies with people of color. But on the other hand, we see the use of facial recognition only growing in China. And it's becoming a very integral part of how business gets done in China. So if you think, ethics, morality in AI and data usage, these may be the most important issues we face as data practitioners today. And we need principles to be at the core of what we are willing to implement. And also these principles and implementations have to be supported by adequate investments in testing and measurement.
This is great. The good news is this is a series. So we're really excited to be a partner with IBM on the CTO Summit Series, because that is such a massive topic that we're actually going to touch on the next session in July. We're going to do a special series just on AI and ethics. So I hope you can all join us on that. We're going to jump to the next question. This is another bundled question because so many people ask the same thing. And we're going to see if Anthony can tackle this one. It's really about privacy. So, what's been the impact of COVID-19 and maybe even civil unrest on data privacy, everything from CCPA in California to GDPR in Europe. But really, how do you protect your data in a post-COVID environment, especially when we're moving into identity management and contact tracing to try to reduce the spread? Anthony?
Sure, thank you. And, there are regulations like that all over the world. So those are the two that we love to think about, but there are similar cousins of those regulations all around the globe. I would make a distinction that there's really two sides to this coin, if you will. One is the epidemiological side, where there's a lot of data about people, and there's medical data and so forth. And then there's the commercial side of it. So I live in the commercial world. I'm going to sort of position myself there in answering your question. Even there, we have lots of data about people in the context of business. We have information about things like ultimate beneficial owners of organizations, et cetera. And then we have news articles that connect people to articulations about companies and people to articulations about other people who are related to companies. So it's a very complicated world. The true north with any regulations are provenance and permissible use. Where did you get the data, and by what right do you feel that you have the right to use it for whatever you're trying to do? If you can't get through those two gates, then you do not have a right to play. You must have an answer to those two questions. Now, we can make an argument about provenance if you created the data yourself, but be very careful because you probably created that data from some other data. So there's this whole meta argument about where did the original data, the original ground truth come from. Once we get through that, you're trying to do something. There's this, what I call the known unmet need, the thing you're trying to do that you can't do today, which is why you're going out and trying to get that new data. There's also the unknown met need. There's the way people might use your data and your capabilities in ways you never understood. You never realized it could be used that way. I don't want to start naming companies, but imagine you had a company that had profiles of people. Well, if there's profiles of people with their pictures and I can develop an eigenface from those profiles and I can use that to search for other pictures of people in other places, all of a sudden I'm using it for forensic purposes. Maybe you didn't intend that, right? So you do need to think about how people might use the hammer you're selling in your hardware store. You do need to think about that. You can't just say, well, it's not my business. Once they buy the hammer, you know, there's some, if not legal, at least ethical responsibility to think about that a bit. And then when we're done with all of that and we think we're good to go and we want to push that green go button, there's how is the environment changing while we're doing all of this? Linda talked about facial recognition. There's facial recognition in casinos to see if people coming in have been barred from the casino. We all know this. It's not a secret. Does it work if they're wearing a face mask? I doubt it, right? So we need to rethink how the environment is changing and how all of these assumptions about provenance and permissible use and the known unmet and the unknown met needs are changing as the environment is being disrupted. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward.
Right. Other than that. Yeah, well, I just have to give a shout out to a couple of people. We've got David Hardoon all the way in Singapore. You're kind of replying to Linda. Dave is Chief Data Officer over in Singapore. Great question on, you know, a need for framework and principles that Linda brought up. And he mentioned the fairness, ethics, accountability, and transparency principles for AI use in the financial sector may be of interest to the panelists. It was published in 2018 by the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Thanks for joining us from Singapore, David, and shout out to Christian Pezin. He spoke at our London CDO Summit. Christian's joining us from Italy. So next question now for Inderpal. And again, a lot of people ask this same question, so kind of gonna bundle it together. Inderpal, it's really on the roles of the CIO, CTO, CDO, and by CDO we're saying Chief Digital, Chief Data, Chief Analytics. Is the IT organization in companies an obstacle to successful data implementation, digital transformation? And if data is information, why is a Chief Data Officer any different than a CIO or a CTO? And how do you see the roles of CDOs, CTOs, and CIOs coexisting in an organization today?
So no, excellent question. You know, this is one that I've faced over and over again, having been a 4-time CDO in 4 different enterprises, right? IBM being the 4th. So I'll take the question about, you know, how do they coexist? And I think the way to understand that is by thinking about the business outcome that's being striven for, right? I mean, if you start from there, that is the true north. That's what's going to set the direction as to where you need to go. So the business outcome is all about business transformation. I mean, that's really what the organization is trying to do. It's trying to transform itself, leverage these technologies to make sure that its business is taken to the next level. And so if you think in terms of business transformation, all the roles you described, Dave, they are all transformation roles. And so in one sense, you can think of this as being a key part of your transformation team that needs to come together to push forward with the business transformation. The other parts of the transformation team are your head of operations, as well as your heads of business, who also have to drive it. And so when they become obstacles to each other, you're very seldom going to achieve the outcome. You won't really get the transformation. So what's the way to look at it? I'll give you from my experience, chief information officers are typically focused on applications. So their world is around applications, enabling applications, getting the functionality that's needed by the company to run its business to the employees and the users and the customers. That's what they're all about. They're all about applications. Chief digital officers, they come at it from the standpoint of usually customer experience. How do they really enable that, facilitate that, streamline that, and that's primarily their focus. The chief data officer gets pulled into the mix because data is essential to all those things. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples. I mean, if you have a large enterprise with a lot of legacy, and the legacy, it hits everything, including applications. So now let's say you're a large enterprise, you have tens of thousands of applications that are being used. The applications themselves become silos of data, and you never extract them. And so there's a way to play this wherein the roles of each person becomes pretty evident, what they need to focus on and how they need to collaborate. So in the example I just mentioned, the CIO and the CDO would start collaborating on how to eliminate all those silos, so that if people wanted to get data that cut across several applications, they wouldn't have to spend an inordinate amount of time doing it, but they could actually find a streamlined way of getting it done. And we have several applications like this that allow us to cut through our major workflows, so that you're able to make the employees more productive, as well as just provide insights in a much more timely manner than is otherwise possible. The CTO role is similarly, it impinges on all these aspects, because the CTO is focused on technology and leveraging technology. And there's certainly a significant aspect of technology where it comes to both applications as well as data. And I think the balance, what I've found, gets struck by first and foremost establishing a really good relationship across these roles. It helps if they report into a common boss. I mean, I think that, that really helps, in which case that person, who could be the chief financial officer or the president of a business unit, is the one who's the overall chief transformation officer, if you think of it, and brings the team together so that they work on this transformation. And it's not about one individual aspect or the other. The chief data officer role, what I've found very useful to think about when I'm sitting across the table with my peers, is in many ways you think, well, somebody else owns the outcome, the business outcome, somebody else owns the business function. And so, and they're the ones who are making use of the data. So you really don't own the data, they do. On the other hand, all the data flows through my organization. So in one sense, you could argue, no, actually I do own it all. But and therein lies the secret to succeeding in this role. It has to be all about collaboration. It's just set up otherwise that it's going to, if it comes into conflict, you won't get the transformation done.
That's a fantastic reply. And while you were chatting, while you were giving your reply, Inderpal, Jody Lavana sent into the chat, what is the role of the board of directors, in ensuring, and the CEO in ensuring more effective data and AI governance within an organization? And I can tell you, the opportunity for chief digital and chief data officers today to grab the CEO slot and to grab a board slot on a publicly traded company has never been better. Like, this is the time to grab those roles. And one of the things we track at the CDO Club is the number of CDOs who become CEO. We see it more on the chief digital officer side and not so much on the data. But now the best example on data was probably Jonathan Liu, right? When Alibaba went public, Jack Ma made his chief data officer, Jonathan Liu, CEO of the publicly traded Alibaba. That makes sense because it's a data-driven company. And it also shows just the brilliance of Jack Ma. And this quarter, we set a number of records at the CDO Club. We had 13 CDOs join the boards of publicly traded companies. That's more than twice the number in just one quarter. That's more than twice the number of all of last year. And by the way, 9 of those 13 people who became board directors were women. So there is no better time. And also, I think it aligns with what Inderpal was saying. If you don't have the budget and you're begging marketing or IT for headcount in order to be successful at data transformation or data-driven culture or digital transformation, it's probably not going to be successful. You really want direct reports to the people in charge. You want a dedicated headcount, dedicated budget. So I do hope if anybody is interested in making that move, I certainly grabbed another board slot just this month. I'm on now the board of Pace University Lubin School of Business for transformative leadership. And, they came to me. So keep those options open. And with that, I know we've got a lot of other questions. We'll reply to your questions. We're running a little bit short of time. So kind of want to wrap it up. I want to thank all of our speakers again, Linda, Anthony, and Inderpal, and especially to IBM for this important CDO Summit Series. Big shout out to Michelle Oster of the CDO Club for pulling this all together. But most of all, we want to thank all of you for participating today and for joining us and the incredible work that you're doing under extremely challenging and unprecedented circumstances. So I hope you too will grab the reins at your company, be a force for positivity, and really lead during these turbulent times. I'll leave you with a quote following up with what Anthony said about, advanced martial artists having to fight in the dark. It reminded me of a quote from Helen Keller, the blind and deaf woman who knew firsthand about darkness and loneliness and the importance of being able to collaborate with other people when she said, alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. So let's move forward together in that spirit of cooperation and collaboration. We hope to see you again in July for the second IBM CDO Summit in the series, which is going to be about ethics and AI. Meantime, please stay safe and healthy, everyone. And now for the closing comments, I'm delighted to reintroduce Caitlin Halferty, IBM's Director of AI Accelerator and Client Success. Caitlin?
Thank you, Dave. Well, I think you've summarized it. Let me just reiterate, really appreciate everyone joining and making the investment of their time. A number of great questions came in. I know we didn't have an opportunity to get to all of them. We will certainly capture them and send a response out. As Dave said, this was the first time, we really pivoted to deliver this experience online and digitally. So thank you for joining us. I encourage feedback. I welcome it. Please send it to Dave, myself. We're really excited. This is a series. We kicked off today. We'll be convening monthly through November. AI ethics is coming up, as well as our CDO and CTO. So the work that our data-driven technology initiatives are coming as well. So please send us feedback. Thank you for joining us today. Fantastic kickoff to the series. Really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you at our next event as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, Anthony, and Inderpal as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye, everybody. See you next time. See you in July.